The biggest challenge you will face as a leader is not strategy, not finance, and not even competition. It's people. Will you be able to find those who not only know how to work, but are also ready to dedicate themselves to the cause? If you miss the mark in choosing people, everything else will collapse. But if you get it right, the team will become your greatest strength. Listen until the end, because in the finale, I will give you a practical tool to test yourself and your team today. Have you ever thought about the paradox that haunts everyone who seeks to lead others? The more you grow as a leader, the less decisive your own skill becomes, and the more important it becomes who is beside you. It almost sounds unfair. You spend years gaining knowledge, shaping character, learning to overcome difficulties, and then it turns out that the greatest challenge is not yourself, but those you invite into your team. I've always said, no business, no organization, no mission will ever rise above the level of the people who carry it. And that is the greatest test for a leader. Not the plan, not the idea, not the market. People. I remember myself at 25. Back then, I thought the most important thing was my own work. I worked day and night, did everything I could, tried to prove to the world that I was worth more. And yet I was left with no money in my pocket, empty promises and deep debts. My life looked like a field where I diligently sowed, but no harvest came. What I didn't understand was that I was working alone. I had no team, no people to share my burden. And when I first met Earl Schaff, my future mentor, he said something simple. Jim, if you want to go far, you need other people, but you must learn to find them. That was the first time I felt how deep this paradox truly was. On my own, I could be diligent, but without others, without those who bring their energy, character, and discipline, my effort had no future. I want you to understand. The true challenge of a leader begins exactly when he takes responsibility, not only for himself, but also for those he calls to walk the path with him. Because it's easy to say, I'll do it myself. It's much harder to say, I'll gather people who can do it together with me. And this is where the moment of truth arrives. Who will they be? What will they be like? Will they bring light or add weight? Will they move forward or stop halfway down the road? This question decides everything. And here we face a harsh reality. Most people look the same at first glance. A resume can be brilliant. Words can sound convincing. A smile can appear sincere. But a person's true value reveals itself only over time, in details, in small responses, in results that cannot be hidden. I learned this from experience. Once, as a young entrepreneur, I brought a few people onto my team who seemed perfect in words. They said all the right things. They promised to work hard. But when the first night shift came, when they had to stay longer, when it was time to make calls that determined our income, they started pulling back. Oh, that's too early. Oh, that's too late. Can't we have more breaks? That's when I understood. Words mean nothing without character, and character shows in the little things. That realization hurt because every mistake in choosing a person costs a leader time, energy, and ultimately results. At the same time, it became the start of another kind of school for me. I began to learn to look deeper, not at what a person says, but at what they do, not at how they present themselves on paper, but at how they behave under stress, in challenges, in situations that don't benefit them. And I understood this is the leader's greatest science, to recognize who stands before him, because the choice of people determines the quality of the team, and the quality of the team determines the result. And that's why today I tell you, the greatest challenge before you is not finding an idea, not developing a plan, not raising capital. The greatest challenge is finding people who will lift that idea together with you. Why is this so important? Because any idea without a team is dead. Any plan without people remains just ink on paper. And any vision without those who will believe in it with you remains only a dream. Leadership is not a lonely journey. It is a path where you learn to take responsibility for yourself and at the same time ignite others. And believe me, it's not always pleasant. It's not always easy. Sometimes you'll have to let go of those you placed your hopes on. Sometimes you'll have to begin the search again and again. But this very process makes you strong, because every right choice of a person for the team becomes a multiplier. Every wrong one stops the movement and adds pain. And this is a reality that cannot be ignored. That's why today we'll talk exactly about this. About 4 key tests that will help you, as a leader, recognize whom to take with you on the journey and whom to leave outside the team. This is not a magic formula and not a guarantee against mistakes, but it is a map that shows where to look for a person's true value. And if you learn to apply these principles, your chances of creating a team that will drive your success will multiply many times over. But before we move on to these 4 tests, I want you to firmly grasp one thought. People themselves are your greatest challenge and at the same time your greatest reward. And when you learn to see this truth, then you will understand that true leadership is not only about control and discipline, it is about the wisdom of choice. When we begin to build a team, the first thing we need to do is look at a person's background. And I don't just mean diplomas or places of work. I mean their story, their past, that invisible line that leads a person from childhood to today. Why is this important? Because people rarely come into your team from scratch. They come with their own habits, beliefs, stories of success or failure. And all of this is their baggage. As a leader, you must have the courage to open that suitcase and see what's inside. Sometimes there are golden tools, experience, discipline, dedication, and sometimes there are stones that will drag you backward. I remember once inviting someone to work with me who looked flawless. They had a good resume, a few recommendations, and in the first minutes of the meeting gave the impression of being a professional. But when I started asking about their previous experience, about what they had done before, I got the feeling something was wrong. They talked more about what they weren't allowed to do than about what they had done, more about obstacles than results, more about people who got in the way than about their own decisions. And then I realized their story lacked responsibility. And if they didn't take responsibility then, in the past, most likely they wouldn't take it in the future either. That was a signal I couldn't ignore. That's why I always say, ask questions about the past. But don't just listen to the answers, and listen to the tone, carefully catch the mood. Does the person talk about past experience as a school that taught them wisdom, or as a series of failures where others were always to blame? It's a very fine difference, but it's exactly what separates someone ready to grow from someone just looking for another place to hide their problems. I once believed, too, that a person could change instantly, without effort, just because they got a new job or signed a new contract. But then life taught me, old habits always follow us like a shadow. And if a person didn't work on themselves yesterday, they won't become new tomorrow just because they entered your team. Of course, change is possible. I changed myself. I've seen thousands of examples, but change is a choice, not an accident. And until you see traces of that choice in someone's story, be careful. My mentor, Earl Schaff, once told me, Jim, look closely at what a person did with what they had, because what they did with little yesterday will show you what they'll do with more tomorrow. That was a lesson I remembered forever. If someone didn't value small opportunities life had already given, they won't value big ones. If someone wasn't honest in small things, they won't be honest in big ones. If someone wasted time when they had plenty, they'll waste it too when time is scarce. The past always leaves its mark. So what does it mean in practice to check someone's background? It means finding out what challenges a person has already faced, what victories they achieved, how they handled failures, how they came out of debt, crises, losses. It means seeing not just facts, but attitude. Because facts can be harsh. Not everyone has had big victories. Not everyone grew up in a world of opportunities. But even in poverty, one can show character. I know this because I grew up on a farm in Idaho. We didn't have much. As a child, I didn't wear fashionable clothes. I didn't see big cities. But my parents taught me to value simple things: honesty, work, respect. And even though my resume back then had no special achievements, my character was already being shaped. And that ultimately gave me the strength to change. So don't just look at external attributes. Look deeper into family history, into education, into previous jobs. Ask, what did this person take away from that period? What lessons? Do they speak with gratitude even about hard times? Or only with bitterness and complaints? Believe me, these details weigh far more than any nice phrase at an interview. Because if a person can't see lessons in the past, they won't see opportunities in the future. And here I want to pause and ask you, do you check your own background? Do you look back not just to recall mistakes, but to draw lessons? Because this works both ways. A leader who hasn't learned to learn from their own past cannot teach others to do it. Your own background is also part of your strength as a leader. If you've learned to take responsibility for your path, you'll be able to see whether others are doing the same. So the first step in choosing people for your team is simple but powerful. Look at what they've done with what they had. That will give you the roadmap to their future. And now stay tuned, because next we'll move on to the second test, and it's even more important, the level of interest. Because what good is someone's experience if their heart isn't on fire? But more on that in a moment. Now let's move on to the second test, the level of interest. And here I want you to listen carefully. Knowledge, experience, even talent are worth nothing without genuine interest. A person may know how to do the job, but if they don't want to do it with heart, the result will always be half measure. And a team where people work halfway is doomed to disappointment. I learned this very early. I remember when I started building my first sales, I invited people who seemed to have it all. They had time, they had skills, they even had good references, but they had no spark in their eyes. They agreed to meetings, but looked more at the clock than at the client. They completed tasks, but without energy, without inner fire. And you know what happened? They disappeared. A month or two passed and they found excuses. This isn't for me. I'm not inspired, and now isn't the best time. And then I realized the greatest resource is not time, not even money. It's true interest. Because interest creates energy, and energy delivers results. I always said genuine interest cannot be faked for long. Yes, a person can play the role for a few days, maybe even a few weeks. But if there's no inner desire, sooner or later it becomes obvious. So I began asking people a simple question: why do you want to do this? And you know what answers separated the real from the fake? Those who were truly interested spoke about their why. They said, I want to learn, I want to grow, I want to change my life. Their words came not from the head, but from the heart. But those just looking for an easy way out answered vaguely, I need a job. Well, why not try? We'll see how it goes. And that was enough to draw a conclusion. I want you to understand, you cannot light a candle that is empty inside. You can give it a shape, a wick, even a match. But if there's no wax, there's nothing to burn. It's the same with people. They must bring with them an inner reserve of interest. A leader can inspire, can push, can show the way. But if the person doesn't want to walk, you won't be able to drag them for long. I remember once a young man came to my presentation. He wasn't very confident, but there was fire in his eyes. At that time, I didn't know if he had the skills or if he'd succeed in sales. But I saw his interest. He asked questions, he took notes, he stayed after the meeting to talk more. And I decided to give him a chance. A few years later, he became one of the best on my team. Lack of experience didn't stop him, because his interest was genuine, and that interest allowed him to learn everything else. Now let me ask you, can you tell the difference between real and fake interest? Because that too is a skill. A leader needs to learn to listen not only to words, but also to the pauses between words, to look not just at the face, but at the eyes. You will feel when someone speaks sincerely. It's like a melody. The real one sounds different. Sometimes it's hard to explain with words, but your heart knows. With experience, it becomes clearer and clearer. So don't be afraid to trust your intuition, because interest is not numbers you can measure. It's a state of the soul. And here I want to emphasize one more thing. Interest is always tested by actions. Someone can be enthusiastic in words, but if after the meeting they do nothing, then it was only noise. Real interest always looks for opportunities, not excuses. If a person is interested, they will find a way. If not, they'll find a reason. This rule never fails. So how do you test interest in practice? Ask the person to do something simple but concrete. For example, come a little earlier, make a few calls, prepare a short list of ideas. Watch how they react. Do their eyes shine, or do they start counting hours and minutes? Do they say okay, or do they ask, how much will I get paid for this? The answers will tell you more than any resume, because interest always shows itself in the willingness to take a step forward. And one more thing, remember, interest now does not always mean interest forever. So as a leader, you must not only find it, but also maintain it. Like a fire in a fireplace, if you don't feed it, it will die out. That's why it's important to create an environment where that interest can grow. But the initial spark must come from the person. If it's not there, you cannot light it on your own. So, the second test, does the person's heart burn for what they do? Because without it, there won't be the strength to endure the long distance. And the next test will reveal even more how a person responds to challenges. And here, friends, true character is revealed. We'll talk about that next. Now, the third test, responses, they are what take the mask off. You can study resumes for a long time and listen to the right words, but a single request, a single deadline, a single unexpected turn, and you'll see a person's real face. I've learned this many times. Character comes through in a response faster than in a speech. Tell someone they need to come earlier tomorrow and listen to what they say. Ask them to stay later when the stage demands it and notice how their voice changes. Request that they take on 2 evenings a week during a busy period. And look closely at their eyes. A response always carries more information than a biography. Tone, pause, a small grimace, a short "do I have to?" All are signals that cannot be ignored. I remember one young man who came to me with an impressive list of achievements. He spoke beautifully, referenced projects, quoted numbers. I gave him a simple task: make 10 contacts in a week, no more. I explained it was a test of agility, not genius. 3 days later, he sent me a message. "This week is tough. Lots going on. Can we reschedule?" I replied calmly, "We can, but life won't reschedule." A week passed, and excuses began. Weather, traffic, unexpected meetings. And then I remembered the rule that has saved me from mistakes dozens of times. Lack of movement is always covered with busyness. Those who want, find a way. Those who don't, find an excuse. And you'll hear those excuses precisely in their responses. There's another example. A young woman with no special credentials, a quiet voice, little experience. I asked her to prepare a short list of ideas in 2 days. She came the next morning, not with 3 points, with 12, numbered by priority. Her response wasn't the phrase, "I'm very motivated," but action, pace, and clarity. That's why responses are litmus paper. They show whether someone has inner discipline, whether they're ready to move from talk to action, whether they'll shrink back when the schedule is tight, when the task is unprofitable, invisible, routine. Remember one simple detail that leaders often miss: the response, "What's the pay?" At the very first step is not about money, it's about focus. Don't confuse fair compensation with early bargaining for convenience. When someone first looks for a benefit instead of a chance to prove themselves, they rarely endure the marathon. Benefit is a poor engine for the long run. Character is what lasts over distance. And character is heard best in how someone responds at the edge of comfort, waking up a little earlier, staying a little later, finishing carefully a small detail no one sees but the conscience. When I say listen to responses, I mean more than words. Look at reaction time. Some reply immediately and clarify details of the work. That's a sign. Some disappear and return with explanations, but that's also a sign. Pay attention to the change of tone when the conversation turns to effort. If the voice gets heavier, that's inner resistance. If it brightens, that's readiness. A leader needs the eyes and ears of a violinist, sensitivity to halftones. The truth lives there in the halftones. Here's another nuance that saves you from disappointments. Don't confuse yes with commitment. Many people say yes out of politeness, others out of momentary enthusiasm. Commitment begins with the first small action after yes. That's why I like giving mini steps. A short one-day task, a micro project for 3 hours, a specific window of calls. In the responses to such steps, everything becomes clear. Some will ask for another instruction, another template, another guarantee, while time slips away. Others will say, "Got it, I'll come back with results." And they do. Those are the people you want around. Of course, we're all learning. Not every hesitant response means bad character, but there are consistent patterns, and your job is to see them early. If every request meets "why so early," and can we shorten it, you're dealing not with a calendar, but with principles. If every task drags out, is that really my responsibility? You're facing not a role issue, but an attitude issue. A team where the spirit of the minimum rules will always lose to a team where the spirit of one more step lives. I like the test I've used for years. It's simple and ruthless. I ask someone to do something that doesn't score them points in others' eyes, but is critical to the cause. Organize a list, secure a contact, fix a small mistake in a material so it looks flawless. If I hear, "who will notice?" I already have my answer. If I hear, "I'll do it so it's right," I also have my answer. Small things are always about values, and values are heard in responses. And here's a small reset of attention. Don't rush to judge someone from a single episode. Give 3. Give a short series of simple challenges on different days at different tempos. Watch how they respond when tired, when everything goes wrong, when success is near, and they mustn't relax but finish the work. A map of responses across 3 small turns will tell you more than one big victory that might be just luck. But that's not all. A response is only a preface. Ahead lies what cannot be faked at all. results. They either exist or they don't. And the last test, the coldest and most honest one, is exactly about this. I'll tell you how to set standards, how to distinguish activity from productivity, how to measure progress without illusions, how to be fair and demanding at the same time. And in the end, as promised, you'll get a practical tool you can apply to your team tonight. So don't switch off. We're moving toward the part where leadership turns into numbers and promises turn into action. Friends, we have come a long way. We talked about background, interest, responses, and results, but now your moment of truth has come. Not just to listen, but to act, because knowledge without action is the same as seeds without soil. They exist, but there will be no harvest. And now we will take a small test together, a test not for someone else, but for you. This will be an honest conversation with yourself. Imagine a scale from 1 to 10. 1, this is not about me at all. 10, I live this every day. And now I will ask you 5 questions. Don't linger. Answer in your mind immediately, quickly, intuitively. It's like a mirror. You look and see a reflection, not paint it. Agreed? Then let's begin. First question, how honestly do you analyze your past? From 1 to 10, do you look at your stories, your decisions as lessons or more as excuses? Because the past is not a burden, it's a school. If you give yourself less than 5, that's a sign. It's time to open the textbook of your own life and start learning again. Remember, the past either teaches or stops you. Second question, how much does your inner fire burn in what you are doing today from 1 to 10? Do you wake up thinking, I have to, or thinking, I want to? Because that's what determines your energy for the day. If your score is lower than you'd like, think about this. Maybe you are building the wrong thing, or you're building it without heart. Fire is always visible. It cannot be faked. Third question, how do you respond to challenges? From 1 to 10, when life says come earlier, stay longer, work deeper, what do you answer? If your first reaction is to look for excuses, your true level is lower than you think. But if you're used to saying, yes, I'll do it, even when it's uncomfortable, then you're already building a character that will not break. Fourth question, what are your real results over the last 90 days? From 1 to 10, not plans, not dreams, not excuses, only facts. Have your earnings grown? Have you strengthened your health? Have you learned something new? Because life is measured not by words, but by the harvest. If you don't see changes, honestly give yourself a lower score. This is not a sentence. It's just a reminder that it's time to act differently. Fifth question, how much are you today surrounded by people who lift you up rather than pull you down? From 1 to 10, think, who in your team, in your circle, influences your course? Are these people who burn with energy and add to your strength, or those who slow you down and drain your energy? This is perhaps the most important question of all, because people shape the environment, and the environment shapes you. So, you have 5 numbers. These are not just digits. This is a mirror of your leadership. And now I want you to look at them closely. Where is the lowest score? That is your growth zone. That's where you need to direct your effort tomorrow, not someday later. Because remember, results change only when you change. And one more thing, don't rush. After this video, find time to write these questions down and answer them again, this time on paper. Come back to them in a week, in a month. See how your numbers change. This will be your personal progress map. And if you want, share at least one number in the comments. Just one, but the most honest. This can become your first step to a new level. And now, friends, take a deep breath. You've already done more than most. Because most people listen and you answered. Most people wait and you are already acting. And that is the difference. Friends, let me tell you straight. The greatest challenge of a leader is people. But the greatest reward of a leader is also people. A team can lift you to heights you would never reach alone. And a team can also pull you into a quagmire that's hard to escape. That's why I say, a leader's wisdom is measured not only by their vision, but by their choices. Remember, you're not just gathering workers. You're assembling character. You're not just looking for ability. You're looking for a heart that burns. You're not just checking responses. You're listening to the soul. You're not just expecting activity. You're evaluating results. And all of this together creates the invisible foundation on which great things are built. Now allow me to leave you with a challenge. Today, look at your team, look at your circle, look at yourself, and ask, who here is pulling you forward and who is holding you back? And if you find a weak link, don't be afraid to make a decision. because your success depends on it, and so does your future. I was once a young man with empty pockets and big dreams, and you know what changed everything? People, mentors, partners, friends, students. Some came, others left. But every right choice added speed. And today I can tell you, if you want to live a life that inspires others, learn to choose people wisely. Because leadership is not about what you have. Leadership is about the people you walk with. So close this video with one thought. Your future is already sitting in your team, in your relationships, in your responses, in your heart. Don't waste time. Act, because life doesn't wait.